Hi everyone, welcome back to the Alabama Woodworker. My name is Hui, and today we're going to be covering the assembly and the build for the base assembly of a trestle table. We'll be covering mortise and tenon joints, we'll be covering bridle joints, we're going to be using a multitude of tools. It's going to be a really fun time. But we've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and get started. The base assembly to the trestle table will be constructed of southern yellow pine. 2x6 dimensional lumber is actually 1.5 inches thick by 5.5 inches wide. After milling, the thickness will be approximately 1.25 inches. Now the base parts to the trestle table will either be 2.5 inches thick or 1.25 inch thick. For the pieces that will be 2.5 inches thick, in this case the feet, the legs, and the braces, I'll have to double up and laminate these pieces. I'm going to mark out the rough length. In this case, I'm going to oversize the length by 1 inch and mill these parts up and then laminate the parts that need to be 2.5 inches thick and then cut them to final length after that. Now that I've allowed my boards to acclimate to my shop's environment, I'm going to go ahead and start the milling process. First, I'm going to face joint on this jointer, then I'm going to take it to my thicknesser and thickness my material, go back to the jointer, edge joint my material, and then finally do a rip on the table saw. You're probably wondering why I went from face jointing to thickness planing instead of face jointing then edge jointing. The reason is quite simple. By face jointing, I create a nice flattened surface that's a reference surface for my planer bed. I then run it through my planer bed, and now I have two reference surfaces that are perfectly parallel to each other and perfectly flat. Now, when I go to my jointer, I'm not dictated by only one orientation to go through the jointer. I can go any orientation. And any of you that have edge jointed before, you know sometimes you get weird grain structure on the edge of your board. Well, you don't have to worry about that anymore. Either way you go through the jointer, you're going to have a perfectly flat surface against that fence. I have all the parts for the base assembly squared 4 sides. Now I'm going to square up one end on the miter saw and cut the stretcher, the legs, the end braces, and the mid brace to final length. The feet I'm going to oversize by about 1/4 inch, so I'll square up the ends and then cut the length of the feet to 29.25 inches. Primarily because I want the mortises to line up, and I'm going to cut the notches for the mortises prior to laminating the pieces together. After those pieces are laminated together and I know that the mortise notches are lined up, then I'll square up the ends and cut it to final length, which is 29 inches. In order to lay out the mortises within the feet, I clamped the two halves of the feet together and marked a center line. I want my mortises to be 2 inches wide, 1.25 inches thick. So I'm going to mark 1 inch on either side. Draw that line. And then because I want my mortise to be 1.25 inches thick, and I know these are 2.5 inches wide, I'm going to go in 5/8 of an inch so that the center portion of my mortise, so that the mortise itself will be 1¼ inches thick. Laying out the mortises and the legs for the stretcher to go through is more or less the same as it was with the feet. I'm going to clamp the two halves of the legs together, and in this case, rather than having a center line, I'm going to mark a line 3 inches down from the top. That's going to be the top of the mortise. Draw that line. I'm then going to come down 3 inches from that because my mortise is going to be 3 inches tall. I'm going to go ahead and draw that line as well. And then I want to come in from the side by 7/8 of an inch because I want my center mortise to be 3/4 of an inch. And so my mortise will be 3/4 of an inch wide by 3 inches long. Some of you might think that the way I cut my mortises to be unconventional. But the truth is I didn't have that many to cut, and I found it to be a lot easier to cut my mortises on my crosscut sled than to bust out the dado stack. Well, that's it. Got all the legs, the 2 feet, and the 2 braces all glued up. I'm going to go ahead and lay out the tenon for the stretcher. The tenon for the stretcher measures 3 inches by 2 5/8 and a thickness of approximately 3/4 of an inch. So I'm going to go ahead and measure 3 inches up, draw that and define that line. Then I'm going to come 2 5/8 of an inch over. I'm going to mark that all the way up and down. Then finally, I'm going to mark ¼ of an inch in from the side of the stretcher. I'm going to finish out the tenon on my bandsaw, and I kicked over the fence 3 inches left of the kerf of the bandsaw blade, and that's going to define the 3 inches for the top of the tenon. Now I'll waste away the top portion of the tenon, and I need that to be 2 5/8 of an inch from the right of the bandsaw blade. Now, to define the left and the right cheeks of the tenon, I want to kick the fence over to 1/4 of an inch from the right reference point of the saw kerf. All right, so just got done on the bandsaw cutting out these lovely tenons. Really wonderful way of doing it. If you've got a well-tuned bandsaw, it comes out real nice, real clean, almost doesn't need to be touched up at all. But let's go ahead and do a test fit and see how this comes out. All right, that's it. That's what I'm looking for. A nice snug fit, but still easy to take out. That's going to be perfect once you put glue on there. That's going to be a really good friction fit. For the tenons on the ends of the legs that will go into the foot assembly of the trestle table, the tenon's going to be 1 1/4 inches wide by 2 inches long by 3 inches deep. So I'm going to go from the end, I'm going to go 5/8 and 1/4 inch from the top and bottom. And I'm going to go 3 inches deep. I finished cutting the tenons for the legs, but the tenons are much too tight for the kind of fit that I'm looking for. So I'm going to shave them down with my block rabbet plane. I'm going to be using a bridle joint to attach the end braces to the leg. The end braces are what are going to support the tabletop, and the mortise portion of the bridle joint that's going to house the braces is 1 inch by 2.5 inches by 1.5 inches. So I'm going to come down by approximately 1.5 inches. Then I'm going to draw that line across. And then I'm going to come in by 3/4 inch, and that is going to give me the width of my mortise for the mortise portion of the bridle joint. I've got my tenoning jig set up to cut the cheeks of the bridle joint. My saw blade is set to 1.5 inches deep, and once I'm done cutting out the cheeks, I'm going to waste away the rest of the material using the bandsaw and then cleaning the bottom of that bridle joint with chisel. So to lay out the mating portion for the bridle joint, I marked the center line of the 2 end braces and mated up the center line of the leg with the center line of the end brace. I marked the width of the leg, and then I came up from the bottom 1.5 inches because that essentially is the depth of the bridle joint. And I also marked 3/4 inch in from the sides of the end brace to mark out the centerpiece of the bridle joint, the mating piece of the bridle joint that will fit into the center of the bridle joint. Well, we finished up the base assembly, and I got to tell you, I'm really happy with the way it came out. We learned a mortise and tenon joint. We learned about the bridle joint. We used the table saw. We used hand tools. We used chisels. We used the bandsaw. Really, this project encompassed a lot of things that I really wanted to practice, and I'm really happy that that it came out looking the way it did. We still have the center support to attach to the base assembly, and we also still have to shape the legs and make the wedges for the wedge tenons. We also need to still make the pegs for the joints at the braces and for the legs, but we'll cover that in the next video. So thanks again for watching. If you got questions, leave them below. Comments, leave them below. And if you like what you saw, hit the like button, or hit the subscribe button, or hit both. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you on the next video.